Gaza, the extermination thereof, and the AIDS attack both have something in common. In fact, they have more than one thing in common. One thing they have in common is that the Israelis perpetuated these erasures from our planet. A second thing that they have in common is the victims preferred to help the people who did it than address the reality of what was done. And the reason for this is that McCartney of the Beatles preferred to help the people who did it than be addressed the reality of what was done. One of the things that was real that was done is that I worked very hard trying to get help and safety and information to the public, and also was very brutally victimized. The way that the attackers operated was through a cinema feeding frenzy of recognition by the Beatles. They all want to play off my intelligence and understanding of what happened in such a way as to aggrandize themselves, which is very typical of Donald Trump, who needs ego gratification at every turn. And he basically pulled a Vulcan mind belt with these individuals in groups and gangs of academics engaged in a secret hostility that they justify under rubrics like for hazing. So the number of people who've been raped, tortured, and murdered is really very sky high. But McCartney claims that his arguments have never been satisfied. And his victims who support being victimized by the people who victimize them announced their agency as had to do this because of the way that I represented myself. First of all, that is not true about them. They didn't have to do this to me. They did not have to do this to me. I was approachable and intelligent. And in fact, one of their hotshots, Evan Nauer, barked me down when I told him that I thought that the ethical structure of the human race was an intelligent design meant to bring prosperity to all of us through public education. He shouted me down. I have to feed my mother and my sister, he shouted at me. So the nature of reality came barreling down at me through the usual gangsters at Pitt and CMU and UW Dialectical. But their reasoning is very simple. They don't have to explain anything because they don't like me. That's their explanation. So they don't explain that I had been implanted with a neuroplasm by Jill someone in Wattenmaker and Gail Burston, neurobehavioral research. They don't have to explain that because they don't like what it did to me. They called it using drugs, which they did too. So I think I'm better than them by being a victim of myself and using drugs. That doesn't really address what actually happened. It covers John Lennon's insurance policy as the master Houdini of the subject, but it doesn't describe the way I was attacked blindside, the way I tried to get help from these murderers from this elementary school office before they had a chance to push drugs on me, the way that I tried to gravitate towards the less hostile agencies when I was kidnapped and tortured. And one of my gravitations towards what seemed to be the less hostile agency was hitchhiking from Pittsburgh to St. Louis just to hear Robert Fripp play, which tragically led to him writing me a postcard that I knew was a bad news thing for me to have and gave back to them, which resulted in no end of mayhem. including a massacre and a bowling alley in Maine. So what gives with these people? Well, it's the con job of girlfriends in the tri-state area. The Triangle Messenger Service knows who's paying the girls who are attacked, prostituted on your domain. So you think, oh, I met a pretty girl and she's going to let me sleep on her couch. But that's not what really happened. What really happened is that Pope Carl subjected you to successive degradations of the X motive under hidden camera by Martin Scorsese. That's what really happened. And the Palestinian groups said, well, good, we have an American and we're going to burn him. And they say that I never proved that Will Zell talking about a scheme to transform the human race by injecting the blood was premeditations of the AIDS attack, when in reality I did prove that many, many times. It was, they ran an AIDS testing operation on Mount Desert Island. The girl had a tattoo of the Grim Reaper pointing at her vagina and needle tracks. It was clearly a dare, a cat call, and induction into being the mouse cage, Aaron Bushnell of the AIDS immolation theology android zone of Carnegie Mellon and Pope Carl and Ron's relationship with Oliver North. So we know with the people and academics in Carnegie Mellon who were ripping off the museum with the help of John Schulman thought about torturing the son of senior faculty, putting a bat in his bed so that he died, racing a van around a school bus at Kelly Elementary. You know what these people think about that. They don't care. That gay, ill Carolyn Burstyn is a nom de guerre. That the confirmation that it was a setup of pornographic genocide is found in the contents of the pornographic industry called the Neva Corporation, which is named in Gail Burstyn's script. They lie in Seattle, say it's all paranoid schizophrenia, and they have the right to gas me, poison me, keep me out of school, ignore my warnings that Israel was engaged in revenge for Auschwitz, and cheer from one side of their Palestinian mouths while going down screaming from the other side of the Palestinian mouths. And all I've ever done was try to warn these people. All I ever tried to do was warn the gay community. I went well above and beyond the call of duty, trying to get help, information, and public notification. I talked to police. I talked to administrators. I went to school for 4 years and was a model student. And all they ever did was scream that I'm a lobster going to put in boiling water. That's what they implied with their gaslighting program at University of Washington as recently as a few days ago. I'm dealing with the criminally insane. This is what Paul McCartney turns out to actually really be. A criminally insane huckster who's so evil that he called the tension that exists between the rave scene that was massacred in Seattle too, the Seattle rave massacre. Mackenzie Shirella was a victim of rave tampering. The rave scene, and unlike me, she appears to have been inducted semi-voluntarily at a relatively older age to the same gangsters of neurohypnosis using evil, cruel, and criminal, undocumented chemistry to manipulate her into a seizure at the wheel, which she was a victim like a car bomb. These murderers think nothing of torturing children, raping an individual until they are dead inside, refusing to allow them to go to school. And this is Paul McCartney. He calls it a sandwich between the sin warriors of Islamic mysticism working with Egypt on the defecation of Arab Spring. and the way of seeing people who might or might not look at pornography in the privacy of their homes. This is what he loves to do. He crushes them with his iron wings and calls it a star sandwich. This is what these criminally insane hostels promote as something they have to go along with because Mercy Hospital said I was mean to a girl. I was never mean to these girls. They came on to me, ditched me. They they got um, under the table pay from people like Pope Carl. That's the only thing that you can find from the organized network of these people. Andrew Swimmer was working with Jaime Carbonell and Brian Mills at Carnegie Mellon University. It was a slander campaign. It was a way of using rumors and slanders and smears. That's what the Russians call compromise. And they never told me, we're going to use you as a symbol because you represent America. What they said were things like Steve Langer said, I'm not sorry for anything I did, only that it had to be you. They left it for me to figure out. And these were people like Donald Trump, Piers Morgan, Ann Mitchell. I mean, these were $1 million people who had their finger on the mute button so that nobody could hear me screaming. And they deafened me, talked about me behind my back, put me places doing things I had never done and I had never been. Said I was a reckless driver at Kelly Elementary School. Ignored me when I reported John Schulman for post office fraud. And played back this idea that they were getting even for the sisterhood of ex-girlfriends who Paul McCartney was bribing to say, he made me say ick when he kissed me good on the cheek. He made me say ick. And Paul McCartney says, I'm going to get up at the next Bob Dylan concert with Greta Thunberg on the microphone. I'm going to announce Greta Thunberg says ick to queerball. Ick, ick. And they all went along with it.